Hello, my name is Stefan Mückstein from Energylab. Today I'm joined by co-host Isra. We're not going to talk about any specific project, but more about QHSE. But before we start, maybe Isra, if you could briefly introduce yourself.
Right, so my name is Isra Mohammed. I'm the QHSE manager at Enerwhere. I've been at Enerwhere for almost 2.5 years. So let's start first with what is HSE or QHSE. As you know, we all know that QHSE stands for Quality, Health, Safety and Environment, which is one of the most critical aspects in every company. So if we don't start caring about safety from the beginning, then what's the point of the company running?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. A company like Enerwhere obviously needs to comply with the rules and regulations set out by the government related to QHSE. But nowadays, during the coronavirus pandemic, it seems that there is a massive amount of additional requirements.
Right.
I know that Enerwhere has introduced sort of social distancing and working from home even prior to it being a legal requirement. Mm-hmm. But there are so many more requirements on the construction side. So maybe you can just elaborate on some of them.
Sure. So initially we've established and maintained a common pandemic plan, which is also known as an emergency preparedness and response plan that we implement across all of our construction sites to ensure a healthy workforce, as well as we usually conduct weekly meetings whereby we try to come up with new preventive measures to improve the situation, such as daily temperature scans before starting any work, mobile hand washing stations, as well as if there are any workers that will be participating in any activity that requires them to break the social distancing, they have to inform the HSE officer. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Excellent. Yeah. I understand they also need to wear gloves, right?
Yes.
Are these special gloves, or can they just use the typical work gloves that they're using?
I mean, as long as they're gloves that does not let anything penetrate, then that's fine. And we usually encourage our employees to hand sanitize every 30 minutes, especially if they're touching surfaces such as doorknobs, ladders, stair rails. Yeah.
So that sounds like a lot of work.
It is actually a lot of work. We have a highly qualified HSE team, so this means that there will be less productivity on the construction aspect and more work or time is being spent on the safety aspect, which is considered critical right now in the situation.
True, I guess safety first, right?
Yes, of course.
What are sort of the procedures that the on-site HSE staff needs to ensure that to ensure safety, basically?
Right. So in addition to the measures I've mentioned earlier, our HSE officers start each shift in the morning by training toolbox dogs, daily task briefings, where they basically train and remind the workers of all the measures that they need to follow during this critical time.
Sorry, just a quick question. So the toolbox talk, is that something specific to COVID-19, or is that something anyway?
It mostly focuses on how they're gonna carry out a specific activity, but considering that we're going through such a critical time, it's very important that they have to include coronavirus protection measures in the toolbox talks.
Okay.
Some of which include sanitizing all the equipment before using them. If they're not allowed to share the equipment. If they had to, or it was a must, they need to sanitize the equipment and let it stay for at least 5 minutes before passing it on to the other worker, as well as PPEs are not allowed to be shared, and we encourage all the workers to bring their own bottles of water because, as you know, cooling stations or cooling water can pose a risk of cross-contamination, and we don't want that, of course.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's amazing once you really actually start thinking about all these implications. You realize there's so many things that you need to watch out for. For example, you mentioned the tools that people are not allowed to share tools anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have thought, I guess that's the case prior to COVID-19 that most of the tools would have been shared. You don't need to have a screwdriver for every individual employee, but now with COVID-19 this is a concern.
Not only that, as well as we also try to limit the number of people at washroom or resting areas at a specific time. Instead of having all of them together, we can have 4 people while practicing obviously the social distancing.
Very good.
Yeah.
So I understand also, I guess transportation is a challenge. So transportation of people to the site, so the workers, but then also delivery of equipment. Can you share some of the COVID-19 implications there?
Right. So for transportation, usually with buses, buses accommodate for 56 workers all at once. So instead of having 56 workers, what usually happens is we have 1 worker per 1 seat, which usually accommodates for three workers. This way we're reducing the number of workers to 30% at each bus, as well as for some of our workers, as you know, they have their own vehicles and some don't. So for the ones that don't, they usually share vehicles. We've also implemented some measures, such as for every vehicle there has to be at least minimum or maximum of 3 employees only, or 3 workers in the car, obviously while practicing social distancing and wearing their masks. Yeah, that's pretty much
Makes
it.
sense. And how about equipment deliveries, potentially also from third parties?
So for deliveries, we've established a delivery zone at each site, where basically it's only specifically limited to the deliverers and the receivers only. So no one else is authorized to be there in that delivery zone, where the package or the parcel is carried by the receiver only, while the deliverer could be in the driving seat, or could be outside while practicing also social distancing. The deliverer and the receiver, nothing is allowed to be passed between them, such as signing of documentation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds really like an almost logistical nightmare.
It is. It is. In the beginning it is, but then people get used to it and they think about their lives, and that's the most important thing, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that not a specific group of workers get infected by COVID-19?
So to reduce the risk of getting the virus, we use one trade at a time. For example, we have a group of workers working on solar module installation, the other is working on cable work, and so on. Not only that, as I mentioned earlier, we reduce the number of people at specific areas, such as resting areas, washrooms, and all of that. This way, not everyone can be at the same place all at once.
Makes sense. So basically what you're saying is that you're creating small teams within your construction crew, and they are not supposed and are allowed to interact throughout the day. So they're not going to go for lunch at the same time. They're not going to be on the same transportation like on the bus. Well, I guess on the bus there's enough social distancing, but you keep individual teams, and in case, worst case, if someone is infected on one of the teams, you then isolate that team, but you're reasonably confident that the other teams are not infected.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
We also, we've realized that one of the most things that could cause cross-contamination between employees, and they're not really aware of it, is hand greetings. I mean, if you noticed, most workers are very friendly with each other. They get so excited to see each other, so they always go for the hand greeting, which is without even being conscious about it. So we try to limit that and stop it from happening.
Very good.
Yeah.
So Isra, what do you then actually do if you suspect that someone of the workers potentially got infected by COVID-19?
So apart from the measures that we've talked about earlier, we usually ask each worker or employee if they've been in contact with anyone that tested positive, or anyone that's experiencing the symptoms, or if they are personally experiencing the symptoms, as well as if they've been outside of the UAE within the past 14 days. If any of them answer yes to these questions, they're usually denied access to the site, and they're investigated furthermore. If someone develops the symptoms during site work, that worker should report to their supervisor or HSE officer, and the worker will be sent back home to be isolated, and then we are going to call the local authorities to get further instructions on what to do. And then that worker will not be permitted to the site unless it is authorized by the local authorities for us to let that person back on site.
Very good. And the testing of the COVID-19 you would do if there are clear symptoms, I guess.
Yes, like fever, which is the most common symptom. Yeah.
And then you wait for the results. Those take, I guess, a couple of days, and for that period, that individual stays isolated.
Yeah, as well as if any of the workers tested positive, or we're almost pretty sure that that person could be carrying the virus, we start our tracing process, where we try to identify who that worker has been in contact with within the past 14 days, to prevent the virus from spreading furthermore.
Absolutely. Yeah. Question unrelated to the actual construction site. How does business continue in the social distancing? I'm not sure whether you can actually see on the video, but the office is pretty much empty. So people are working from home, exercising social distancing, but obviously people still need to interact. How does that work?
Well, usually through phone calls and also Microsoft Teams. We've been using Microsoft Teams ever since this whole thing started, and it's been pretty helpful.
Excellent. Yeah. Is that also working with clients, or are you're not so much?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So let's hope that as few people get infected, ideally no one, and that this whole pandemic passes by soon, and we can go back to life as usual.
I mean, as long as people just follow the rules, we're all good to go.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
In the coming week, probably we'll have an HSE video from one of the construction sites, showing some of the points that Isra highlighted here in actual practice. Hope to see you soon. Bye.